The moment she saw the man sitting beside her, her expression changed instantly. Her lips curled in disgust, and she pulled her designer handbag closer to her lap, as if the mere presence of the man next to her was an inconvenience. The black man, dressed in a crisp suit, remained calm, offering no reaction. He had seen this before. But the woman didn't stop at subtle gestures. She pressed the flight attendant button repeatedly. Impatience etched on her face. The nearby passengers turned their heads, sensing something was about to happen. "I need another seat," she said the moment the flight attendant arrived. Her voice was loud enough for others to hear. "I refuse to sit next to him." There was a moment of tense silence. The woman expected agreement. She expected the flight attendant to cater to her demands. But what happened next? It left the entire cabin in stunned silence. What would you have done in this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments. Stay until the end, because this flight is about to take an unforgettable turn. The soft hum of the airplane engines filled the cabin as passengers settled into their seats, preparing for the long flight ahead. The overhead compartments clicked shut one by one as flight attendants moved through the aisles, assisting passengers with last-minute requests. It was a routine day for the crew, a full flight, a mix of business and leisure travelers, and the usual subtle tension that filled the air before takeoff. In seat 7A, a black man in his early 40s adjusted his watch and settled into his seat. He was dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, his posture relaxed, his presence composed. He was no stranger to travel. To those who paid attention, he carried the quiet confidence of someone used to first-class flights, business meetings, and high-profile discussions. But today, his presence alone would spark something unexpected. Across the aisle, in seat 7B, a woman in her late 50s flipped through a glossy magazine. Everything about her screamed wealth and privilege. Her designer dress, her expensive pearl earrings, the way she waved off the flight attendant when asked if she needed anything. She had boarded early, ensuring her oversized designer bag had space in the overhead bin before the rest of the passengers arrived. But now, her mood soured instantly as she noticed the man sitting beside her. Her smile faded. Her nose wrinkled slightly. She shifted uncomfortably, as if the very idea of sharing space with him was unbearable. A few passengers around them noticed, but no one said anything. At first, the woman glanced toward the aisle, waiting impatiently for a flight attendant to pass by. When no one appeared immediately, she pressed the call button. Once, then twice, then repeatedly. Passengers nearby exchanged glances. Something was about to happen. A young flight attendant in her mid-20s, wearing a neatly pressed uniform, appeared within seconds. She had dealt with demanding passengers before, but something about the woman's posture, her tone, made her wary. "Yes, ma'am. How can I assist you?" she asked with a professional smile. The woman barely glanced at her, her fingers adjusting her pearl necklace. "I need another seat," she said, her voice clipped. The flight attendant blinked. "Is there an issue with your seat?" The woman's next words sent a ripple of tension through the nearby passengers. "I refuse to sit next to him." She didn't say the words outright, but the tone, the way her eyes flickered toward the black man beside her, it was all painfully clear. For a moment, there was silence. The black man said nothing. He didn't need to. This wasn't the first time he had experienced something like this. But today would be different. The tension in the cabin thickened. Passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably, some exchanging uneasy glances, others pretended not to hear, their eyes glued to their screens or books. But everyone heard her. The flight attendant, maintaining her professional smile, tilted her head slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Could you clarify what the issue is with your seat?" The woman sighed dramatically, as if she couldn't believe she had to explain herself. She gestured at the man beside her. "I just don't feel comfortable sitting next to him." Her voice was lower this time, but the intent behind her words was crystal clear. The black man still didn't react. He sat calmly, his hands resting on his lap, as if this kind of treatment was nothing new to him. But today, he didn't have to say a word, because someone else was about to speak for him. The flight attendant's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened. She had seen this before. Passengers who thought money gave them the right to demand anything. People who thought they were above others. She inhaled deeply and chose her next words carefully. "I understand, ma'am. Let me check what I can do for you." The woman sat up straighter, looking pleased with herself. She thought she had won. The passengers watching, some with curiosity, others with disgust, waited to see what would happen next. And then, the flight attendant did something no one expected. She turned away from the woman and looked directly at the black man. Her voice was warm, respectful, loud enough for the entire section to hear. "Sir, I sincerely apologize for the situation. If you'd like, we'd be happy to move you to first class, free of charge." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. The rich woman's face went from smug satisfaction to complete shock. "What?" she blurted, her voice sharp. The flight attendant didn't even glance at her. She kept her attention on the man. "We don't tolerate discrimination on this airline, sir. If there's any inconvenience, we'd be happy to offer you a more comfortable experience in first class." The man, who had been silent until now, let a small smile play on his lips. He didn't need this upgrade, but he understood the message behind it. With quiet dignity, he nodded. "That sounds wonderful. Thank you." The flight attendant gestured toward the front of the plane. Passengers turned their heads, watching as he stood up. No arrogance, no gloating, just grace. And as he walked toward first class, the applause started. It began with one person, then another, until soon the entire section was clapping. Not for the woman, but for him, and for the flight attendant who had stood up when it mattered. The woman's face was beet red. She looked around, realizing no one was on her side. Passengers shook their heads. A few whispered. Someone behind her muttered, "Serves her right." But the worst part... The flight attendant turned back to her with a polite smile. "Unfortunately, ma'am, we don't have any more seats available in first class. But if you're still uncomfortable, we'd be happy to help you find another flight." The woman froze. "Wait, what?" she stammered. "You're not moving me." The flight attendant didn't flinch. "We don't move passengers based on their preferences for who sits next to them, ma'am. If that's a problem, you're welcome to exit the plane." A few passengers laughed quietly. The woman was speechless. For the rest of the flight, she sat stiffly, saying nothing, her face flushed, because for the first time, she was the one being judged. The rich woman sat frozen in her seat, her fingers gripping the armrest so tightly her knuckles turned white. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had expected the usual reaction, a quiet apology, a swift seat change, and an agreement that her comfort mattered more than anything else. Instead, she had been humiliated. Not by insults, not by arguments, but by justice. And the worst part? Everyone saw it. The flight attendant remained professional, standing tall, her expression calm. She had handled situations like this before, but rarely did she see such a public, undeniable moment of accountability. People weren't just watching. They were taking notes. And some were recording. A few rows behind, a teenage girl whispered to her mother, "Why was she so mean?" Her mother, shifting uncomfortably, sighed. because some people think money makes them better than others. But today, she learned it doesn't. A businessman sitting across the aisle chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. That's a first-class lesson if I've ever seen one. Another woman, an elderly passenger with a kind smile, leaned over and said just loud enough for the rich woman to hear, "Respect is the real luxury, dear. You should try it sometime." The woman's face flushed even deeper. Meanwhile, in first class, the black man settled into his new seat, stretching out his legs with quiet amusement. He hadn't needed this upgrade. He had booked his original seat without complaint, without entitlement. But now, he had received something far more valuable than extra legroom: dignity, and the knowledge that today, for once, things had played out the way they should. The rich woman kept her eyes forward for the remainder of the flight. She didn't speak to anyone. She barely moved, because for the first time in a long time, she had no control over the narrative. She wasn't the one being catered to. She wasn't the one being agreed with. She was the one being judged, and it wasn't a feeling she enjoyed. As the plane began its descent, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. On behalf of the crew, we'd like to thank you for choosing us today." The passengers began gathering their belongings, conversations picking up again. But there was still a quiet tension around row 7B, because everyone knew this wasn't just another flight. It was a moment that wouldn't be forgotten. When the wheels touched down and the plane taxied to the gate, the seatbelt sign dinged off. People stood, stretching, retrieving their bags, and then the applause started again. Not for the landing, not for the rich woman, but for the flight attendant, and for the man in first class. The woman didn't look up. She just grabbed her designer handbag, stood stiffly, and waited for the aisle to clear. Because today, she was no longer the center of attention. She had lost something more valuable than money: respect, and she knew she'd never get it back. As the plane doors opened and passengers began filing out, the rich woman kept her head low, avoiding eye contact. She had walked onto this flight expecting special treatment. Instead, she had walked off it as the passenger no one wanted to be. She could still feel the stares, the judgment, the weight of what had just happened. For the first time in her life, she realized that her money couldn't buy respect, and now she had to live with the consequences. A few rows ahead, the black man rose from his first-class seat, calmly gathering his belongings. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. Because today wasn't about revenge. It was about principle. And he knew that while he would forget this flight soon, the woman never would. At the exit, the flight attendant who had stood up for him stood near the door, offering polite smiles as passengers disembarked. When the man approached, she extended her hand. "Thank you for your patience, sir." He shook it firmly. "And thank you for yours." They exchanged a quiet look, one of mutual understanding. Because today she hadn't just done her job. She had set an example. Behind them, the rich woman shuffled toward the exit, her usual confident stride replaced by uncertainty. As she passed the flight attendant, she hesitated, as if considering saying something. An excuse, a justification, anything to save face, but she knew nothing she said would change what had happened. So instead, she did something she had never done before. She stayed silent. Outside the terminal, the black man was greeted by a waiting driver. As he slid into the back seat of the luxury car, his phone buzzed. A message from a colleague. "Saw the video. Looks like the world's seeing it too." He raised an eyebrow. "Video?" Curious, he opened his social media feed. And there it was, a grainy clip, recorded by a passenger, already going viral. The title, Flight attendant stands up to racist passenger. Justice served at 30,000 feet. The video had thousands of likes, shares, and comments. He exhaled. Because for once, justice had been caught on camera, and this time, no one could rewrite the truth. As for the rich woman, she sat in the back of a taxi, scrolling through her phone in growing horror. Her face, her voice, all over the internet. She had spent her life controlling her image. And now, she had no control at all. For the first time, she wasn't the one judging others. She was the one being judged. And she knew that no amount of money could change what the world had just seen. As the days passed, the video from the flight continued to spread. News outlets picked it up. Social media buzzed with discussions about privilege, bias, and the power of standing up for what's right. Some people cheered for the flight attendant, calling her a hero. Others praised the black man for his grace and composure. And the rich woman, she tried to ignore it. She tried to delete comments. But no matter how much money she had, she couldn't erase the truth. Meanwhile, the flight attendant continued her work as usual. She hadn't done what she did for attention. She had done it because it was the right thing to do. But one afternoon, as she arrived for her shift, her manager pulled her aside. "Corporate saw the video," he said. Her stomach dropped. Was she about to be fired? Had she done too much? Then her manager smiled. "They want to recognize you for it." A week later, the airline held a special ceremony. In front of hundreds of employees, executives, and staff, she was given an award for outstanding service. The CEO shook her hand, saying, "In this job, we are expected to serve people, but we should never serve discrimination. Thank you for standing up when it mattered." The applause was deafening. For the first time, she realized how much one decision could impact the world. She hadn't just helped a passenger. She had set a new standard. As for the black man, his company released a statement after the incident, commending him for his composure and grace. They had always known him as a leader, but now the world did too. He continued his work, traveling across the world, advocating for diversity and inclusion. But something had changed. Now, whenever he boarded a flight, people recognized him. Flight attendants treated him with extra care. Passengers greeted him with respect. Because now he was more than just another traveler. He was a symbol of dignity. And the rich woman, she had spent her life believing her money made her untouchable. But now she couldn't walk into a store, a hotel, or an airport without wondering, does someone recognize me? Does someone know what I did? Her friends distanced themselves. Her business suffered. And worst of all, she couldn't escape the shame. She had thought she was better than others. Now, she wasn't better. She was the lesson. At the end of the day, this wasn't just about one flight. It was about a shift in power, a moment when entitlement lost and justice won. Because in a world where too many turn a blind eye, this time someone had stood up. And because of that, the world had changed, just a little bit more. This story wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was about dignity, respect, and the power of doing what's right. One flight attendant made a choice. She could have ignored the situation, quietly moved the passenger, and let discrimination win. But instead, she took a stand. And because of that, justice was served. Not with anger, but with action. We live in a world where bias still exists, where some people believe status is more important than character. But stories like this prove one thing: no one is above basic human decency. And sometimes, all it takes is one person speaking up to remind the world what truly matters. What do you think? Should more companies take a stand against discrimination like this airline did? Let us know in the comments. If you believe in respect for everyone, no matter their background, hit that like button and share this video. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this, because sometimes one decision changes everything. See you in the next video.